Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation. And of course that was about the World War II generation. And what I'm going to talk about is the greatest Irish generation, in my opinion, which was that generation between 1920 and 1940. And number one, the reason why it was the greatest, it was because it was the largest in modern times. There have been Irish coming to this country since the colonial times and before, even Jamestown, and it was a steady trickle. 1900, it began to drop off, and by the time World War I came, there were very few Irish immigrating to New York. And then, of course, through World War I, and then after that, the Troubles in Ireland, there was practically nobody coming from Ireland. So there was about a 10-15 year gap where the tradition of Irish immigration was broken. And it only picked up again in the 1920s, about 1922, 23. After the Irish Civil War, about 25,000 on average came to the United States every year. So over the course of the next 10 years or so, there were about 200,000 Irish immigrants added to the total. Most of those stayed in New York City, or a lot of them. And it was an opportunity for the last of the real Irish neighborhoods to develop. And it wasn't just like Woodlawn today, where we have practically just one Irish neighborhood left in the whole United States. You can go up to Boston, you won't find anything like that Yonkers, Woodlawn area. It's rare now, and we only have that one neighborhood. But in the 1920s, there were Irish neighborhoods everywhere. An Irish neighborhood was identified more by a parish than anything else. Of course, you could point to the west and east side, the area that they used to call the Silk Stocking District, that became very trendy and very upper class, was a real Irish working class district full of people from County Kerry. And in the 1920s and 30s, it regularly sent an Irish representative to the House of Representatives. There was nothing fancy about it, but there were dozens and dozens of them. Not only Manhattan, most of the immigrants staying in Manhattan for a while until they could get acclimatized, then they moved on, spread to the other boroughs. There were areas where we never think of Irish today. Harlem had a very strong Irish community. And along 125th Street, it was the center for the Irish dance halls. There were dozens of Irish dance halls, large ones, the Galway Hall, the West of Ireland Hall, the Munster Hall, not the one to Star Munster up in the Bronx, that was a different one. There were dozens of Sligo Hall. As you can tell, a lot of the dance halls catered to a particular county from Ireland. Because there was so many immigrants, you could specialize in those years. But 125th Street had loads of Irish dance halls, but there were dozens, perhaps 100 of them scattered around New York City in the 1930s. To keep the Irish together, you had two things. You had Irish newspapers, and there were three of them, the Irish Advocate, the Irish Echo, and the Irish World. And also, actually, there was a fourth, the Gaelic American. And these were not the newspapers that you see today. They were very newsy and chatty. They were very large newspapers. And they had a lot of details about the nitty-gritty of Irish life in New York. And it would mention individuals. So you read these newspapers to find out about the people you knew, because the newspapers identified everybody. It identified who was sick, who was in hospital, who was going on vacation, and you got to know more about your neighbors through the newspapers than you would ever imagine in today's Irish American newspapers. The other means of following up on Irish life in New York was the radio. And there were loads of Irish radio programs in New York City. They were on every day of the week, sometimes in the middle of the day. Some of you might remember Dorothy Hayden. Dorothy Hayden succeeded her father, who died in 1945, and she had a very folksy, newsy way of conducting that program. And I remember on Sunday nights, when she was on, everything went off, the television, and everybody had to at least be quiet while Dorothy Hayden she had a very staccato-like presentation, and even the commercials followed this thing, this peculiar Dorothy Hayden way of talking. Dancing Thursday, Friday, Saturday night at the Tuxedo Ballroom. And now the man from the County Mayo, John McHale, will be welcoming you at his upholstery store on West 106th Street. So she had a well-known, she was well-known and had a following among the Irish around New York City. This community of Irish was very strong, and it reminds me of the way Irish people meet one another to kind of, I always contended that GPS, the Global Positioning Service, was actually invented by the Irish. Because there's a certain way when Irish immigrants would meet each other and would kind of find out where they were from. So even when they were from different counties, they would try to get a common bond by identifying somebody that they both knew. And it was usually somebody that owned a tavern or a store. And finally, when they could say, oh, you do know Pat O'Brien. Oh, do you know his sister, Kate? Yes, I know Kate. Well, everybody could relax, you see. You know it wasn't you knew that it wasn't an axe murderer or somebody who was going to cut your throat. Or even worse. So you had this strong community, and it was a peculiar thing because we really don't know it too much today. I doubt even if it is the same in Woodlawn and adjacent parts of Yonkers. But you had a whole network of Irish businesses that serviced the Irish community. Travel agents, for one thing. You went to an Irish travel agent to plan your trip to Ireland. And that was a big thing because Irish immigrants didn't get to go back to Ireland every year. It was something that was planned and thought about for a long time. And they used a particular term when they finally paid for their passage. And that was, and it's something that's passed out of the American language. I don't know whether it was peculiarly Irish or not. It was, you know, when somebody asked, well, which travel agent did you use? They would say, well, who did you settle with? And that term is gone, but it was, that was always the term that was used. Who did you settle with? I thought it was peculiar. I never asked any questions at the time, but now it occurs to me, well, what it really meant to book. But there was a certain trust when you settled with an Irish travel agency. You were in good hands, better than the Allstate people. So the travel to Ireland, if it wasn't in a big group, it was one that very often by steamship, there was a departure party where all the friends gathered on the west side. We're on board the steamship, and the last farewell to a returning immigrant was made. Now, this is a short little address, and I would say that a mark of the Irish strength in New York was the way they